A convenience store is basically the next step in evolution from the old general store that would sell food and beverages and some household items. But back more than a century ago was also a place where townspeople would come and hang out. When you think of a convenience store, especially in the last half century, you think of rows of coolers with soda and water, some with beer, aisles of candy and chips, maybe some kind of hot food that you could buy but would not be recommended. Living on Cape Cod, living in New England, if I say convenience store, your mind is likely going to go to Cumberland Farms or 7-Eleven. But I want to go way, way back in the day and look back at some of the classic old school convenience stores that are no longer with us. Besides Cumberland Farms and 7-Eleven here, there are some really big convenience store chains all over the country. Speedway is around here a lot. There's Wawa, there's Sheetz, Circle K, and more. Growing up as a child of the 80s, teenager of the 90s on Cape Cod, I visited a lot of different convenience stores to get my soda and candy fix. The one that was closest to me was just a single place called Town Quick Mart, which was the typical convenience store. But it was a 10-minute walk away, and back in the day, you could actually walk to the store when you were 10, 11 years old and not worry about getting kidnapped. But if I wanted to go further, I could head probably another mile down the street and go to one of the classics of old school convenience stores, and that was Lil Peach. I don't know how many Lil Peaches there were in New England. I mean, it had to be close to 100. I'm not sure. But the logo was literally a peach, and I just remember it being Lil, not little. The funny thing is about a lot of these convenience stores is there wasn't much that made them special or stand out besides their logo. It's not like going to a fast food restaurant and them having a signature item. Cumbies and 7-Eleven, they do, but the ones that are out of business, I guess maybe they needed signature items. Back then, though, you go to Lil Peach, grab some candy and soda, maybe walk the railroad tracks a bit like Stand By Me, but in the 80s. The company went out of business in 1996 with the Tedeschi food shops buying the company and basically rebranding all the stores into Tedeschi's. Interesting, though, when doing the research for this segment, I came across the rebranded Lil Peach store. It's starting up again. Go to lilpeachstores.com because apparently a new Lil Peach has opened in Hudson, Massachusetts. It's listed at 28 Cox Street. I had never heard of it. I've definitely never been there, but if any of you listen to this and go and see it, let me know if it reminds you of the old Lil Peach. Because according to the website, they're bringing it back, so it's got to be connected to the original. I mentioned Tedeschi. That was a huge one in New England. The first Tedeschi shop opened in 1923. And another neat connection to Cape Cod and New England is the founder Angelo Tedeschi eventually opened a supermarket chain called Angelo's, which I'm sure I'll cover in depth at some point on the podcast. At its peak, there were more than 200 Tedeschi's located in Massachusetts and some in New Hampshire. They had local commercials, Fast and Friendly, that's Tedeschi. If you're not from the area, I wouldn't expect you to remember that. Like I said earlier, Tedeschi bought Lil Peach in 1996, and in 2002, they also bought out another former big New England convenience store in Store 24. The Store 24 chain was based out of Waltham, Massachusetts, and when they were purchased in 2002, there were 80 convenience stores in the chain. And with this purchase, coupled with the purchase of Lil Peach, it made Tedeschi's the third largest convenience store in New England, naturally behind Cumberland Farms and 7-Eleven. It's interesting when researching Store 24 and Lil Peach, they seem like such a piece of long, distant history. But even as recent as 2008, there were stores of each that remained as Tedeschi slowly changed over Store 24 and Lil Peach to their own brand. Maybe it feels longer because the brands were both just slowly dying and getting phased out. Another popular convenience store chain of yesteryear was White Hen Pantry. They were founded in Lombard, Illinois in 1965. It's interesting because they were known a lot in the Midwest, specifically in and around Detroit, Michigan, Illinois, but yet there was a connection to Massachusetts, New Hampshire, which is a weird leap. But as is the case a lot in business, a larger company came and swallowed up White Hen Pantry. In 2006, they were bought by 7-Eleven. And just like with Lil Peach and Store 24 with Tedeschi's, slowly 7-Eleven turned the White Hen Pantries all into 7-Elevens. I specifically remember one right on the Dennis Harwich line that went from White Hen to 7-Eleven, and now it's closed and empty. But again, like I said, all these defunct stores, there's no real properties about it that made it stand out besides their logo. If I mention to you White Hen Pantry, Store 24, Lil Peach, can you think of anything unique about them besides their logos? Because I can't. One convenience store chain that was definitely connected to me growing up was Christie's. They were owned by local politician and businessman Christy Myhos. And I always remember when I was a kid, there was a Christie's right next to my grandfather's donut shop in Hyannis. So that's how I first knew of the brand. The original Christie's opened in Brockton, Massachusetts, much like my grandfather's original donut shop. So it's interesting that they followed each other to Cape Cod. At its peak in the early 1990s, there were 144 Christie's throughout Massachusetts, Rhode Island, and Maine. But stop me if you've heard this one before. In 1998, they sold all but 8 of the stores to 7-Eleven. And those 8 were repurposed by Christy Myhos. So even though the chain really went out of business almost 25 years ago, there were still a few left over. The final stores were closed in 2010, and eventually Myhos filed for bankruptcy a few years later. So it's a recurring theme of the larger companies eating the smaller ones. And so we'll circle back to one of the former giants of New England convenience stores, Tedeschi's, because obviously they're not around anymore. In 2015, the Tedeschi company was bought by 7-Eleven. And much like with the other store brands, it was slowly turned over from Tedeschi to 7-Eleven. And when they said it was a gradual turnover, they weren't kidding. So we're 7 years out from when the Tedeschi's was purchased by 7-Eleven, and there's still a couple up near Boston. Now, granted, maybe these just haven't been updated and they are closed. So I'm not saying go to Whitman or Canton to see if these Tedeschi's are open, but just looking just now, I saw a couple. At some point in the future, I'm sure I will do a segment about the rise of Cumberland Farms, considering they started in Rhode Island. But it's amazing to think back. Did you go to any of those convenience stores in New England? I don't remember ever going to a Store 24, but I sure as hell went to Christie's and Lil Peach and Tedeschi's and White Hen Pantry. But like I've said a couple times, can you think of anything unique about them? Maybe there's a reason why Cumberland Farms and 7-Eleven have continued to grow while those other ones faded away. And if you're listening to this from outside of New England, let me know about some of the similar convenience stores where you grew up. Some former large chains that were bought out by bigger chains. Because I'm sure all across the country there are similar ones to that. But this was a fun trip going a little bit back in the day. Bringing back the memories of walking to Lil Peach to get candy and soda and chips. And hopefully it brought back some good memories for you as well.